There's been a recent uptick in interest in our cattle panel greenhouses on this channel, and so I thought what would be nice is as we get towards fall here to do an update video that shows some details of how these are functioning in the landscape. This is the first one that I made in the winter of 2015-2016, so this is coming into its fourth season, and so let's talk about how it's been performing so far. The first thing I'd like to note right off the bat is after 3 solid years of this 4-panel cattle panel greenhouse in our landscape, as high tunnel I should call it, it's been performing beautifully for us. That's with some very heavy winds, some very deep snows. We are in central New York, zone 5B. We get real winters. So this has seen 2 feet of snow. It's seen -15 Fahrenheit. It's held up beautifully. Key element to why I think this has worked nicely, the cattle panels themselves they feel borderline indestructible. The poly really matters, and I'm going to link in the description to where we source this poly, and I've mentioned this in past videos. We use the A.M. Leonard poly remnant sale, which I'll link to in the description, for offcuts, and in this case we're looking at 6 mil UV stabilized poly, greenhouse and high tunnel plastic. It really makes a difference. If you're going to build something like this, do not get contractor plastic, 2 mil or 4 mil plastic, from a box store. It really matters that you get actual greenhouse plastic. It seems to last incredibly well. And let's take a look inside. We've got Tulsi growing like crazy in here, holy basil. And right now you can hear the bumblebees really enjoying themselves. We haven't had a frost yet outside. We might get our first frost in the next few nights. The plants that are in here, so long as we close the door, should be completely fine with the first frosts of fall. Basically, until we get into the mid-20s or a little colder, things will not freeze in here. So frost tender plants like the holy basil, like the Malabar spinach, which is this really interesting climbing tropical vine. It makes this mucilaginous and tasty greens. The Malochia, which is an Egyptian spinach type plant. All of these are not really hardy to New York State, but in a high tunnel like this we get a nice extension. It holds the option for us of collecting ample seed from our holy basils, and it allowed us to test this season. This is a castor plant for those that are interested. Not so much food as the seeds are poisonous, but it's a neat plant, maybe a little too large for being in a high tunnel like this, but it's a real stunner. And the Malabar spinach right now is ready to climb on it. In this back corner we've got Miyoga ginger, which we've since learned is actually completely hardy to our winters outside. Sasha soon will be experimenting with pickling. The traditional use with these in Japan and Korea is to pickle these flowering shoots. What a beauty. So not necessary in this high tunnel, since it's proven to be cold hardy outside, but really nice to have the insurance of making sure these genetics are protected in case we have a particularly brutal winter. I'll link in the description to this as well. This is a wax driven arm that reacts to temperature. There's no electronics, and for 3.5 years now it has reliably actuated this simple window to vent excess heat. I think it was around $35 or $40. I'm sure I should have been lubricating these more or doing some sort of treatment with them. Once we get into the absolute depths of winter, I can remove this part and just simply lock it shut. But as we get closer to frost, to have something that can actively open and close the window passively, or actively passively, without us having to do it, it's very helpful. And this has worked just fine for the whole time that this high tunnel's been here. This high tunnel has some nice diversity in it coming into the fall. Probably a missed opportunity on our part would be we could have harvested this Tulsi back quite a bit harder, given a really deep soaking to the soil and sown out more fall and winter crops, kales, mustards, and the like, spinaches, lettuces, because basically as soon as we get to the mid-20s in here, this will melt down to just about nothing, and then we'll have nothing in here for the winter. So that was a missed opportunity in this high tunnel. We'll have to plan for that. The side benefit though is that it'll be clean and open in the spring and ready to go. We've got some more husk cherry harvesting to do in here. So many of them all on the ground. They'll just keep going for a while. If you haven't grown husk cherries, they're wonderful. They taste somewhere between maybe pineapple and caramels. Anyway, this high tunnel's been working. Let's look at some other ones. Tucked into the jungle that is the front yard garden, you can see the sunchokes here are just absolutely monstrous right now. We've got another high tunnel, very similar layout, again 4 cattle panels, so another $150 investment in materials, and it's been working quite nicely. This one's 3 years old. Probably would be really nice for us to clean more thoroughly on the inside here. This is a downside of growing tomatoes without proper trellising, is that they pushed up against the poly and now it's kind of a mess, but we can wash that off. Same basic picture. It's worked nicely, have had no issues with the poly fatiguing or ripping. This is that same poly remnant material, linked in the description. In this high tunnel, we had tomatoes. It's a lot more empty in here. We had this completely filled with tomatoes up until about a month ago. We did the final harvest there, cleared them out, and now the understory of some anise hyssops, which were sown in here. Certainly didn't need to be in here for the season, but they're growing just fine. And on the south side, we've got Bolivian rainbow, which is a somewhat rare old heirloom variety of hot peppers. Incredibly spicy, incredibly delicious, and they've grown really nicely in here. And our cool north-facing slope with moist soils, we really need that bonus of heat that these high tunnels provide. And in here, we went ahead, when we harvested out some of the summer crops that were in here, we sowed this out to a mix of kale all throughout. That's what all these carpets of seedlings are. Then we've got some hot peppers again that are still doing their thing, and some nice mustards on this side. They'll need to be thinned soon enough, but this should perform nicely as far as giving us some benefit into the winter of having some extension and some winter crops. If they stay low like this, they may very well overwinter entirely in here and then perk up in the spring and provide us some lovely early February and March spring greens in here. This high tunnel, a little bit lower tech as far as the window. Instead of having the wax piston, we employ the stick system, which is in open mode for the summer. Once we get closer to frost, we'll pull that out and let it close, and then we'll have to just kind of keep an eye on things. If we get some heat, we'll have to open that up. But that's done just fine so far. Probably worth the extra $30 to make it a little bit better, but if that's what you've got, it seems to work just fine. And we've got a little barrel in here that's been cut off, and that hose connects to our rainwater catchment system off of the house, so we can open that up and fill this 55-gallon tank down here and be able to dip in with a watering can. We definitely need to give this north side of the high tunnel a very deep soaking with water and get it sown to some sort of cover crop. Now that we're into October, it's a little too late to sow it out to a crop that will come to fruition necessarily this fall, but we've got some leftover seed from arugula and lettuce and kales that we've saved, so it can't hurt to try, but we definitely got to get on it. The clock is a-ticking. Again, in the jungle of our chicken yard, we've got a high tunnel that is still in kind of feral but productive state. You can see a little chicken keeping guard. Thanks for watching the high tunnel for us. This has been planted out to mainly tomatoes. Whoever else is in here are weeds, so to speak, but we've just been only pulling them as needed. Believe it or not, this whole space has been watered only 2 or 3 times. The pathway you see in the center that the chickens are walking on, that was dug out about a foot deep, deeper than it is, filled with wood chips and sawdust. And when it rains heavily, I've talked about this in another video, Past our composting operation, there's a channel that brings water from the gardens upslope to the south of here, and this will fill with water, very, very nutrient-rich water, and wick water into these beds. And this season, it's taken care of itself almost entirely. We've got to finish up the crops in here, the harvest, but these tomatoes are still going real strong, growing like crazy. And this has been compatible growing in here with the chickens, because what we've done is hammered in some stakes and simply put some fencing material. This is about 2 or 3 foot high, 2x4 wire. And as tomatoes get a little overripe or rot, we can drop them in the walkways and the chickens can enjoy them. But and the chickens keep the weeds down entirely in this walkway. They add some fertility. They enjoy this space when it's raining, and they can't really jump in there and interrupt or give problems to the tomatoes. So that's worked out really nicely. We'll finish the harvest of these tomatoes in the next few days, probably pull these plants and again get this area seeded out to a cover crop for the winter, and maybe take this metal fencing away so the chickens can have access to that sometime in the winter. You can see we've got a lot of tomatoes in here, whole lot more harvesting to do. This high tunnel's really been helpful. We even have a fig planted here on the northeast corner. It's grown beautifully this year. Remains to be seen once we close this window and we batten it down for the winter, whether or not it will overwinter gracefully enough to be able to make a nice fruit set next year. I have my doubts, but it's always worth trying a fig if it's not too much of a hassle. So 3 high tunnels, each made for around $150, 4 cattle panels in each one, and remnant poly purchased online. You can buy it in bulk and then cut them down to size. Served us incredibly well for over 3 years now, and no signs of wear and tear that make us nervous that they're going to break this winter. Really recommended. Small footprint, very easy to make, minimal carpentry skills, and at $1 a square foot. I can't say enough positive things about the basic concept of a cattle panel high tunnel in the landscape. You could scale it up, make a longer one with more panels if you chose. Buyer beware, if you go too long with these, you probably would need some sort of spanning support in the middle to help keep them lofty if there's a heavy snow load. But at 4 panels, they've served us beautifully. You could go smaller if you needed. You could make them a little wider or a little more narrow, push and pull the variables as much as you need. But for a few hour to a weekend long project at $1 a square foot, we love these. Maybe we'll make some more, although we're starting to really fill up here. So thanks for watching.